Hey, everybody. Welcome to Florida Women's Freedom Coalition conversation with Aryana Gharagozloo. She is a fourth-year medical student at the University of Miami's medical school. She's also an attorney, and she's also a mother and about to become a mother for the second time. So she's a busy woman with lots to say. And so we're going to do a quick 20-minute conversation with her so she can get back to her very full life. I'm Anna Hochkammer. I'm the executive director of Florida Women's Freedom Coalition. And we are about 40 days out from November 5th. We're going to have a bunch of stuff that's really important on our ballots in Florida, but we're going to have the thing we're going to focus on today, which is Amendment 4, way down at the bottom of the ballot. Amendment 4 is the amendment to limit government interference with abortion. As most of you probably know at this point, as of May 1st, under current Florida law, women are prohibited from accessing abortion care after 6 weeks of gestation, which is a near total abortion ban and one of the most restrictive bans in the country. And so I'm joined today by the fabulous guest, Aryana Gharagozloo, who brings a multifaceted perspective to this issue. She's an attorney, she's a mother, and a fourth-year medical student. She's planning to pursue a career in obstetrics and gynecology, and she's active in a group based out of the University of Miami called Reproductive Health Advocates. Welcome, Aryana, and thank you for doing this conversation with us.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. And I apologize in advance. I am 39 weeks pregnant, as you noted. So not quite at my best, but very grateful and honored to be here.
You are fantastic. So many of us who are on this call have been in your shoes more than once, understand completely. First of all, introduce yourself. Explain a little bit of your unique professional background. You're a practicing attorney. Now you're a fourth-year medical student. What influenced that decision to go back to school?
Yes, absolutely. Before I do, the attorney in me would be remiss if I did not clarify at the outset of our discussion that any and all views expressed are my own in my own individual capacity and not representative of any institutions or organizations I may be affiliated with. So that being said, returning to my background, I actually initially was pre-med and undergraduate at the University of Miami, and I completed all the prerequisites. But at age 21, 22, I just couldn't make that major life commitment to medicine without any real world experience. But I knew I wanted a professional degree, and I was an English major, so law school was a natural transition. But my heart always remained in medicine, and I ended up practicing as a corporate attorney for 6 years, primarily in New York City. And I derived a lot of intellectual satisfaction from my career, but as I said, my heart was never fully in it. And as I became more senior, I knew it was now or never to take that leap and return back to medicine. So I finally pulled the trigger, and I'm happy to report that from the very first day, I knew I'd made the right decision.
That's fantastic. You know, it's always nice to hear people pumping the brakes on things that aren't the right fit for them and doing something new. I used to be a middle school algebra teacher, and now I'm involved in politics.
Wow.
So, you know, it's invigorating to see people pursuing their passions. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're currently a fourth-year medical student. That means that you were a second-year medical student when Roe v. Wade was overturned in the Dobbs decision. What was your initial reaction to that decision, perhaps as a trained attorney and perhaps as a medical student as well?
You know, given the way the pendulum was swinging politically leading into it and the recent Supreme Court appointments, I suspected Roe v. Wade would be overturned, but it was still one of those pinch me moments where you can't really comprehend that this is the new reality and that we were slipping back in time. I actually remember having a discussion with my mother-in-law and some of her friends in the immediate aftermath, most of whom were very conservative, by the way, and they were just appalled that women's rights were less protected now in our current modern times compared with when they were younger, which really, drives the perspective home. And yeah, I sort of expected it given the way the winds were blowing, but it doesn't mean it was any less frustrating or horrifying.
Absolutely. And in the aftermath of the fall of Roe v. Wade, Florida passed two different abortion bans. The first was a 15-week ban with no restrictions for rape or incest. The second was a 6-week ban with what we refer to often as no real exceptions for rape, incest, and to some extent the health of the mother, because of the way they're written. What's your reaction to these abortion bans, both as a concept and in the practice of medicine?
You know, absolute horror. As you noted at the outset of the conversation, the 6-week ban is basically a near total ban on abortion. Most women aren't even aware they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And even assuming they are, prior to the 6 weeks, getting an abortion within that time frame is unfeasible given the limited accessibility and scheduling and the 24-hour mandatory waiting period required in Florida. So that's just essentially a blanket ban. The 15-week ban was obviously a little bit better because it grants more time. And in theory, I'm not actually opposed to setting some sort of time limit, but that's subject to several very crucial caveats. The first being abortion care has to actually be accessible, and it's not. It can't be that women have to take days off of work and incur traveling expenses to reach a provider because there are huge geographic swaths where legitimate care isn't available. So that's one. Two, there have to be clearly delineated carve-outs, like you said, you know, to some extent to save the life of the mother, but it's not a clearly delineated exception. And we also need to flesh out more some leeway for health conditions of the fetus, and that hasn't been done. And there has to be true deference to the medical provider so that they're not refraining from acting out of fear of punishment. And then the third is that the timing has to actually make sense. Most medical conditions that make parents pause and question whether they want to continue a pregnancy or not aren't detectable or diagnosable until an amniocentesis at 15 weeks or the anatomy scan, which occurs at 18 to 20 weeks of gestation. So setting some sort of arbitrary time limit before those can be completed and processed and then an appointment can be scheduled is completely illogical.
That's
So that
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, in the op-ed that you had published in the Miami Herald, you went into some depth about some of the medical ambiguities as the law is written. And one of the pushbacks I hear from the other side on this all the time is, well, it does have exceptions. It does allow for medical exceptions. It does allow for all these exceptions. So to claim otherwise is misleading. But it seems to me that an exception that's next to impossible to access isn't really an exception. Just like medical care you can't actually access is the same as not having the medical care at all. From a practitioner's perspective, where are the ambiguities and why do they give practitioners so much pause?
Well, so typically with any sort of legislation, there's the written law, and then what ends up developing is the case law as sort of these boundaries are determined based on individual cases. And in this case, the penalty is so steep for providers. It's a third-degree felony to violate that doctors are naturally unwilling to test out any of these. And when it comes to the medical conditions, there's so many gray areas that legislators just, you know, wholesale ignored the advice and expertise of the medical community on. So there are all these gray areas that just are not being addressed because everyone's too scared to act. So I can give a few examples in the defined terms themselves of the legislation. There are many ambiguities. So for example, fatal fetal abnormality, that's defined as a terminal condition that in reasonable medical judgment, regardless of the provision of life-saving medical treatment, is incompatible with life outside the womb and will result in death upon birth or imminently thereafter. But how imminent is imminently thereafter? There are numerous medical conditions that are incompatible with life, but the survival range is anywhere from a few seconds to outside the womb to young adulthood. And it's impossible to predict with any certainty where within that range any one case will fall. So Patau syndrome, for example, is a condition that comes to mind where there's an extra copy of chromosome 13 that causes severe intellectual and physical disabilities, and the median life expectancy is 7 to 10 days. So are we really, you know, in that case, expecting mothers to carry to term deliver a baby and then bury it a week later just because it's unclear if that's imminent enough for legislators. There's also DeGeorge syndrome, where a microdeletion on chromosome 22 causes a constellation of defects that are most significant for cardiac abnormalities and a severely compromised immune system. So the child is subject to a lifetime of intense medical care and a limited life expectancy if it's even fortunate to survive beyond the early years. So imminent isn't really clear there. The definition of gestation is similarly ambiguous. It's defined as the development of a human embryo or fetus as calculated from the first day of the pregnant woman's last menstrual period. So that appears straightforward, but what if the woman doesn't know the first day of her last menstrual period, which is often the case if you're not actively trying to become pregnant and tracking your menstrual cycles? Or what if your menstrual cycles are irregular? And then, assuming that date is known, the law fails to address how that date is to be confirmed. It also doesn't address the number of days. Is that 6 weeks, 0 days? Is that 6 weeks and 6 days? You could reasonably interpret it either way. So these are just a couple of the omissions and ambiguities present within the law. And if we had time, I could go into many more. I addressed several others in the op-ed, but the point is that the law is rife with these omissions and ambiguities, and they can't go unaddressed.
And generates sort of mission paralysis from the side of the caretaker and information paralysis from the side of the patient, correct?
Exactly.
So much unknown, so much at stake, both in some cases, a much wanted pregnancy, and in other cases, the practitioner's very career. And who wants to be the guinea pig to test out where the limits of the law are when we have human lives on the line, we have people's careers on the line, and we have healthcare infrastructure that is not informed enough to make these calls on a day-to-day basis. It does really present a conundrum to people trying to do the best for their patients and receive the best that they can from the medical system. Apropos of your experience, you are actively involved at a group at the University of Miami called Reproductive Health Advocates. Can you tell us more about them? And can you tell us why you decided to get involved and who is part of Reproductive Health Advocates?
Yes, it would be my pleasure. So my third year of medical school, I became involved with Reproductive Health Advocates. Our faculty advisor is Dr. Bishop, who is wonderful. And it's a student-run organization. We provide patient navigation to primarily underinsured and uninsured women in the community for sexual and reproductive health services. And these can include everything from contraceptive counseling, discussing with them the options that are available and what makes the most sense for their individual profile, appointment scheduling, fee waiver applications, support services. And as an organization, we also participate in local community efforts to advocate for access to reproductive health care. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we partnered with Vote ER to register student voters. And I got involved with reproductive health advocates because in my own personal life now, I'm a little bit older, I'm on my second pregnancy. I've witnessed so many women I care about, friends and family, silently suffer through miscarriages, painful termination decisions, and fertility struggles. So I just wanted to get more involved overall in women's health causes.
Because it's not like you have enough on your plate already. And that's really fantastic. The doers in our lives often do, right? The people who are actually the ones who get out there and get their hands dirty are usually the ones who keep on doing that. So I would imagine you'll keep doing that for the rest of your life. Here's a question for you. You deal with patients, you see patients all the time. How common is it for the patients you treat or that you assist other people in treating right now as a medical student to know that they're living in an abortion ban state? Is your experience that patients, that women and their families know what they're up against when they get to a doctor's office?
So my experience has obviously been somewhat limited because I'm a medical student, and I'm also in a phase of our curriculum where we're rotating through various electives. I did quite recently take an elective it was a reproductive health care elective with Dr. Bishop, actually. And that was interesting. There did seem to be a bit of an uptick in patients wanting some form of contraception, but then there were still a lot of patients who came in who just for normal checkups, gynecologic checkups, who didn't really seem to be aware of the legal landscape and the implications of not taking all these extreme safeguards to prevent against pregnancy because of how limited accessibility is to abortion now.
And of
Um,
course, you might have seen the headlines that the Florida Department of Education is now encouraging some of our public schools to emphasize abstinence and to skip the parts of the curriculum that deal with contraception. So that ignorance may grow if the political winds don't turn.
mhm,
Devastating consequences for women and their families, I think.
mhm.
It's shaping up to be quite a perfect storm. Um, as a medical student who's pursuing a career in obstetrics and gynecology, um, what are the potential consequences for women in Florida and to some extent across the country if these abortion bans are allowed to stand? I mean, other than having a difficult pregnancy, which oftentimes proponents of abortion bans seem to think is um, no more troublesome than having a hangnail. But what are the consequences for women who are forced to go through pregnancies against medical advice?
I think we're already starting to see the effects as these restrictive abortion bans went into effect throughout the country in the post Roe v. Wade era. It has immediately become apparent that women's lives are at stake, their health is severely compromised. There have been so many cases reported of women not being able to receive timely abortions as they were actively miscarrying and having to wait until they were septic and at very serious risk of death before they could receive appropriate medical attention. And those are just the very public cases. There are so many silent scenarios where women are forced to endure these high risk pregnancies that are unwanted, or even if they are wanted initially, then they discover how risky it is to themselves, to the fetus, and they're forced to carry to term, or carry to term and then lose a child because the law wasn't clear and abortion wasn't an option. So patients are suffering, and as you noted before, providers are paralyzed because they don't want to lose their licenses or become felons merely for providing legitimate health care.
So, what would be your biggest piece of advice to medical students, to medical professionals, to hospital administrators, to healthcare consultants, to people in the industry of caring for the women and girls in Florida who want to get involved in promoting the passage of Amendment 4 and serious, thoughtful public health policy? How would you suggest that they open that door?
I think the most important thing is to engage in these conversations with family members and friends, the people who you actually have a direct influence on, and respectfully parse out what their objections may be and dispel myths and really have these discussions about what's at stake and what the actual medical realities are. In the case of most abortions, particularly later term ones. And of course, also encourage voter registration and participation. But I think just having those respectful conversations with your inner circle and the people who you can actually influence really goes a long way, in addition to, of course, getting involved with any community efforts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often say when I talk to groups that every family in America has an abortion story. And if you don't know your family's abortion story, it's just because nobody's told it to you yet, not because it doesn't exist. And so for
Mhm.
all of us out there who are interested in this topic, I think that's great advice. It's talking to your sisters, your cousins, your moms, your grandma. It's letting the men in our lives into what has traditionally been considered a female space and to female experiences.
Mhm.
Traditionally, it's just male healthcare providers who get the nitty gritty about what's going on. And we've often in our society left men out of that conversation. It's a great opportunity to draw them in and to talk about the real experiences people had pre-1973, pre-safe legal access to abortion in America, and what we will see in America in this post-Dobbs universe.
Mhm.
I hope that everyone will inform themselves to have those conversations. I'm going to ask you for one more piece of advice. If I was having that conversation with someone in my life, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, and no particular knowledge about pregnancy and childbirth, except for what I experienced myself as a mother. If I encounter someone who's on the fence about Amendment 4, what would you say? What argument would you make to them to try and encourage them to vote yes on 4?
You know, I think it's important to clarify because I do think there's a bit of confusion on this point that Amendment 4 is not about promoting or encouraging abortion. It's merely about restricting government interference into this intensely personal and often painful decision. Abortion is such an emotionally charged topic for so many, which is why I wanted to bring to light the medical realities that are often implicated, but often not considered, so that people could have a more informed vote. And I also think it's important to point out that since the beginning of human history, women have gotten abortions. And time again, history has proven that they will continue to do so, regardless of the legal landscape. It's just that having these restrictive laws in place is going to jeopardize their safety and disproportionately impact women with less means. So, this is not just about abortion, it's a healthcare issue, it's a privacy issue, it's an individual liberty issue, and I hope Floridians will keep all of this in mind as they cast their votes in November.
Thank you so much, Aryana. This has been a fantastic conversation. I appreciate you, your expertise, and your time. I hope you enjoy the new baby that's coming and the one you already have. And thank you so much for talking to Florida Women's Freedom Coalition and for all the work you do advocating for women and girls in this state. We really appreciate you.
Of course, thank you so much. Thank you. This really was a privilege and an honor.
Enjoy. Thank you, everybody. If you haven't done so yet today, go on to FWFC's website, FloridaWomen'sFreedomCoalition.com, hit the donate button and help us fund the news, the ads, the mailers, the digital ads, and all of the rest of the infrastructure we need to win in November. Appreciate you. Bye-bye.